Well, this morning we are starting a series called The Prodigal God. And so I'm excited about this, about just something new out of this story. Now, a lot of us probably have heard of the story of the prodigal son, but many people have not. This is a unique story and parable that Jesus talks about. As I was reading this story and just continuing to just study it, I just started thinking about some warning signs. And I looked up, some of the most ridiculous warning signs there are out there. And these are actual warning signs that they have on these products. It says, do not use the snowblower on the roof. Do not allow children to play in the dishwasher. The clothes iron had this advice. It said, warnings, never iron clothes while they are being worn. On a Superman costume, it said, warning, cape does not enable user to fly. On the bottle of a hair coloring, it says, do not use as ice cream topping. I cannot make these up. These are on here. On a cardboard sun shield for a car, it says, do not drive with sun shield in place. On a toner cartridge, it said, do not eat the toner. On a portable stroller, it says, caution, remove infant before folding for storage. And my personal favorite says, in a microwave oven manual, it says, do not use for drying pets. And I tell you these just warning labels because as I was reading this story, I started to think, what are some of the warning signs or just warning labels that maybe we read over and we don't necessarily, really grasp as we read this story. We're talking about the prodigal God finding a place at the table. Finding a place at this table that our Father has for us. And as we go through this for the next few weeks, you'll notice that we would have two chairs. One chair being the younger son, which majority of, you'll hear a lot of the sermons from other pastors really talk about the younger son. And we're going to talk about him today and what he went through and what was going on. But there's another seat here. And this is for the older son and what he means. And as we go through this series the next couple of weeks, I want you to just grasp, what is God telling us? What is He telling us about the table? What is He telling us about the younger son, about the older son? What is He telling us about the Father? But today, before we really get into this parable that Jesus talks about. And if you want to follow along with us, we're going to be talking from the book of Luke, chapter 15. And the next few weeks, it's really going to be talking about what a lot of people would call the parable of the lost son or the prodigal son. But this is more than just about him. This morning, we're going to talk about the audience. Who is listening to Jesus when He's telling us this story? See, as we go through this story, you may ask the question, which character am I? Which character am I? When I was telling a friend that I was going to be speaking on the parable of the prodigal son, he raised the question, he goes, who is the most stressed out who is the most stressed out in this parable? And as I was thinking about it, I'm like, well, I thought maybe it's the son because he's stressed out and he comes back. Maybe it's the father, maybe the older brother because he's out. And in all different ways, they're all the most stressed out. And so I told him this. He goes, you're actually wrong. My friend said that the most stressed out was the fattened calf. Okay, but anyway, so But today we're going to be talking about the audience and those that are listening to Jesus. As he tells us in Luke chapter 15, verse 1 through 2. In the New Living Translation, it says this: tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. And you can just leave this up there for a moment. In the Message version, it says, by this time a lot of men and women of doubtful reputation were hanging around Jesus, listening intently. The Pharisees and religious scholars were not pleased, not at all pleased. They grumbled. He takes in sinners and eats meals with them, treating them like old friends. Their grumbling triggered this story. There's two types of people that are listening to this story. There are the notorious sinners, the tax collectors and notorious sinners. And if you do research on the tax collectors, they were just some of the most hated people because they were associated with the evil Romans. And so they were just as bad as the notorious sinners. So you have this group of people, the tax collectors and notorious sinners, and then on the other side, I could just picture Jesus sitting, standing in the middle, telling this parable with some, sinners and the tax collectors and everyone and everybody that no one wanted to be around. And then he had on the other side the Pharisees, also known as the religious leaders of the time. People that would help make the law. These two groups of, the tax collectors, they observed neither the tax collectors and sinners, they neither observed the moral laws of the Bible. They didn't live the way that we should be living, the traditional pureness followed by the laws. They engaged in wild living. The Pharisees and the teachers on the other side, they upheld the traditional morality of their upbringing. They studied and obeyed Scripture. They worshiped faithfully and prayed constantly. So as Jesus is telling this story, as he gets into it with his current audience in mind, Jesus tells a story that places both of the listeners, and you can even imagine Jesus at the table with both sides of the listeners. The tax collectors and sinners, the Pharisees, both of them sitting there. And as he says this story, and as we read this parable of the prodigal son, we have to understand that we fit into one of these two categories of people in the crowd. You either perceive yourself as a sinner, aware that you're broken, aware that you have made mistakes, or you perceive yourself as a Pharisee, proud of your ability to be a good person who follows the rules. In Romans 3:23, it says this: for everyone has sinned. We all fall short of God's glorious standards. With this one verse, we find the message Jesus was preparing to teach to the crowd of listeners. And the story goes like this. It says this, if you go to the next slide, if you would, it says, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 younger sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. This is such an amazing part of the story. Because as Jesus is telling this story, and as we're talking about today, and as we're talking about this parable, I don't want you to just really look at the elderly son or the younger son. I want you to picture yourself being in the audience as Jesus tells this story. Because he's not just telling us today, he was telling them at that time, those that were listening. And he tells this story about this man had 2 sons. And the younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate before you die. And this was kind of remarkable because not only did he want it before he died, but he was asking for a third of his father's possessions. Because back then what they would do is the oldest son would automatically get 2/3 of everything that the father had. And then all of the other children of the family would divide up the 1/3 left. Well, since there was only 2 of them, he grabbed 1/3. And he was asking his father to give him 1/3 of everything he owns right now. Everything that he owns before his father's even dead. He's basically telling his father, hey, I can't wait for you to die. Give me 1/3 of everything you have right now. And those that are listening to Jesus tell this story, they can, this conversation would have been like unforgivable. This audience, the Pharisees, the religious teachers, as Jesus is telling this story, is probably thinking, man, he wants this before he dies. This is such an unforgivable act. There's no way that this son should be able to have this. They would expect the father to disown the son. They would expect the father to probably get mad at the son. They would expect all of this of the father, never giving his inheritance away. And Jesus kind of throws a little twist into the story. Because he says, the Father grants it. He grants it. The Father agreed to do this. And this would have just blown the minds away of everyone that was just listening to this story. Because the younger son decided that, man, my way is so much better than my father's way. He didn't need his father anymore. He knows everything that's going on. I mean, it's so funny as I deal with young people, and I talk with students all the time who talk about how they know everything. Parents in here, everybody ever heard that before? Right? Probably not, though. But, I even have my 7-year-old daughter who walks up to me, and I'll be like, and I ask her to do something. She goes, I know, Dad. I know exactly what I'm doing. Dad, I know what I'm doing. I'm like, whoa, sassy girl here. Somebody's going to get in trouble. But as the younger son is asking for all of this, we don't see the father. We don't see the father getting on or trying to talk his way out of it or trying to like, hey, it's okay, don't go or anything like that. That we see the father agreeing to this, to divide his wealth between his sons. And as the audience is listening, this is just something that is so shocking. And after he gets his third of the estate, it goes on to tell us in Luke 15:13-16. It says, a few days later, his son packed up all his belongings and moved to a distant land. And there he wasted all of his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land and he began to starve. He persuaded the local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. This was the same young man that, as we just read about, that kind of knew exactly what he was doing, right? He decided to leave the father. He decided to do everything on his own. And when we leave the Father, and we leave our Heavenly Father and say, hey, God, I got this. I don't need you anymore. What's going to happen is, for a moment, we're going to live this exciting life. But if you don't have fulfillment in our Father in heaven, then that life that you think is so exciting is eventually going to be nothing. And it's a symbol, and Jesus is telling this to everybody around because the younger son has finally reached the end. No more money, no more fame, no more anything. He is disconnected from his father. When we disconnect from our Father, there's emptiness. But it doesn't have to be like that all the time. In John 10:10, it says, a thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. Just imagine the audience as they're sitting there listening to this story about how the son, maybe some of them started getting a little teary-eyed because the son is hungry, he's alone. Maybe some of them are probably thinking, he deserves it. Well, I mean, it was his choice. He made the choice. He should get exactly what he wanted to get. This is exactly right for him. But imagine the surprise of the crowd as Jesus revealed to them what would happen next. In Luke chapter 15, 17 through 19, as we continue the story, it says, when he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the servants have food enough to spare. And here I'm dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. Please take me on. I don't know about you, but there have been times where we have felt like we were the younger son. And maybe even those that were listening, that were at the table listening to Jesus, even have felt like this, where you've done everything you can. You know you've walked away from God, and the only thing you can do is to just go back to the Father. The audience listening to Jesus about the story knew full well that the younger brother returning to his father deserved to be met with rejection and anger. There was probably some of them that was like the younger brother disrespected his father. He basically essentially wished that his father would die so he can grab the inheritance. He took side, he took the wrong side from his father. He went away. He went and wasted all of it, everything that his father gave him. There's no way when he comes back that anything good should happen to him. And it says this, it says, so he returned home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, filled with love and compassion. Probably my favorite part of this, it says he ran to his son. He ran to his son. I could just picture this right now of the audience who is listening to Jesus. And I could picture those sinners, those tax collectors. And imagine just a tear coming down the face as they've realized, that was me. I can imagine them thinking, wow, there's a chance for me. But at the same token, I could see those religious leaders, those people who were wanting to be the good person all the time, look at Jesus and wonder, why are you saying that? Why are you saying that? There's no way that he can be. Why would the father run to him? They're probably thinking, yeah, he's going to run to him in a violent way. They're probably thinking, what is going to happen? What is the response that he is going to have when he runs to his son? But something unexpected happened. The father welcomed him home with open arms. And he did this without question. It's so amazing to see this story and what God has for all of us. And as we're listening to this story today, There may be some people that are on the side of the religious leaders thinking, there's no way if my son did that, I'd never allow this to happen. Or if I would never allow this to happen. But it's not about that, because Jesus is teaching us how to be compassionate. He's teaching us His love. But the story doesn't end there. If I was writing the story, I'd have been just like, cut right there, that's it, great. This is a Hollywood, it's going to be blockbuster kind of thing. He goes away, he comes back, everybody's happy, yada, yada. But the story doesn't end there. It goes on to say this. It says, meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house. And he asked one of his servants what was going on. Your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed a fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go into the party. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, all these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to do. And in all that time you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours, see, here's pretty cool. He doesn't call him my brother. He says, when the son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing a fattened calf. His father said to him, look, dear son, you have always stayed with me, and everything I have is yours. We have had to celebrate this happy day. For your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. The older brother's attitude. He's upset with his younger brother because he's being celebrated for coming back. And I could just imagine the audience at this time, because Jesus has shifted his mind from the sinners and to the tax collectors, and he shifted the story to the Pharisees and the religious leaders, saying, hey, listen, why are you so mad when people come back? But as we read that story, we read that the older brother is all about me, me, and me. What does that have to do about me? How does this help me? His attitude is, I deserve to be celebrated. His attitude is, listen, I've been doing this all my life. I need something. Why doesn't anybody ever talk about me? And sometimes in the church, for some of us, even myself, we'd be sitting in the church, sitting there. Why is this one always being celebrated? Why is this person always doing this? Or why doesn't anybody ever recognize me? Why doesn't anybody ever say anything about me? Why can't I? And it's about I, me, and it's nothing about anyone else. It's always about what people are not doing to me, or what I, need, what I need to be, recognized as. And the mentality of the audience that is listening to Jesus at this time is either you or I. One of these two parties is you or I. Either we know that we're sinners, either we know that we're broken, we've made mistakes, and we want to be redeemed by Jesus, or we're on the other side where we're sitting here wondering, man, why can't you celebrate me, Jesus? Because the only thing that the brother heard about the whole story was what he wasn't getting out of it. What he didn't get. He doesn't even call him his brother. He's like, listen, I don't even get a goat. He gets this fattened calf, and I don't even get a goat. I deserve to be celebrated. I've earned it. The parable of the prodigal son is such a wonderful story, because each of us lives the role of all the characters at some point in our lives. The role of the loving, the role of the being loved, even when we're unlovable. And maybe most of all, the role of feeling we haven't been loved enough. Sometimes the older son, maybe he just felt like he wasn't loved enough. The whole story is about the presence of the one who told the story, Jesus. Jesus is telling this not to just talk about a father and his two sons, but Jesus was such a great communicator that he was telling this story to you and I today. He's telling this story to all of us, not only to the Pharisees and the tax collectors and the notorious sinners, but as we sit at the table with Jesus, sometimes it's hard to find our place. Because either we feel like we're so broken that we don't deserve to be here, or we're so involved to our own selves that we believe no one else deserves to be here with us. When Jesus is talking about this story, he's talking about his love that he has for everybody. And at any moment, if we have the attitude of, that person should not be here, look what they've done, then I would probably suggest to you that you need to get up and go to a different table. Because that's not the table that Jesus is teaching us. It's not the life that he wants us to live. The parable of the prodigal son, or the two sons, or whatever the title you want to give to this parable, is an important life story to all of us. A decision that we have to make. To not be the Pharisees or the people that are judging everyone else, but to know that we are broken and that we will come in contact with others that are broken. And we need to love them the way the Father loved his two sons. See, I love the story about the Father, because not only does he run to the son that came back, but I love the part that when he found out that his other son wasn't going to the party, he went to him too. See, he doesn't just go to the one who came back, he goes to the ones that are still out there. And he came back and he came to the other son, pleading, hey, stay with me. You've always been with me. And to those of you that are out there today, Jesus is saying the same thing to you. Stay with me. I know you might have been hurt. I know you might have felt like someone just crushed all your dreams, or it's not going the way you want it. Just stay with me. And for those of you that might be lost, when you decide to come back, when you decide to, hey, I can't do this anymore, I need my Father, I'm here to tell you he's going to run after you. Because he loves everyone. And it's the same type of love, compassion, that we need to share with everyone else. So as you read this story, I ask that you read this story every day for the next week. And as you read this story, continue to think about those that were listening to the story that Jesus was talking about, and how Jesus may be talking to you today.